In the early hours of the 31st of August of 1888, a policeman comes down his beats in Whitechapel. Suddenly, he sees something lying in a gateway, and as he gets closer, he sees it's a woman lying on the ground. He's got a lantern, so he shines the lantern onto her and sees that her throat's been cut. What he doesn't see is that beneath her blood-stained clothing, she's been disemboweled.
There were several people living in the area. There was even people in the very house next to the gates in which she was found, and they hear and see nothing.
It had obviously happened quietly, right under a window where honest people were sleeping in their beds.
It was a very, very ferocious attack. At the mortuary, it was noticed that there's a deep, jagged wound from the breastbone all the way down to the abdomen, completely severing the tissue inside her stomach.
When the authorities went round saying, does anyone recognise this person, she was identified as someone they knew as Polly.
Mary Ann Nichols, commonly known as Polly, she was 43 years old at the time of her murder.
Polly hadn't been in the East End of London for that long, as far as we can tell, but she'd become an alcoholic, and that led to a downward spiral.
And she was extremely poor, living on her own, struggling to earn a living through casual prostitution.
She certainly had been drinking that night, and she didn't have the money to pay for a bed, so she was ejected from a common lodging house.
She'd gone out for sex work, trying to raise the money for a bed for the night. Polly's last known words to the deputy of the lodging house is actually, "See what a jolly bonnet I've got now?" So that's the sort of the words she was saying. She said, "I'm going out to be able to get a gentleman, because see how beautiful I'm looking right now. I'll be back, keep my bed, I'll be back shortly." And that's when she was attacked and horribly mutilated.
The killer put his fingers around her throat, killing her before she had a chance to cry out. In the East End in the 1880s, murder wasn't as common as you might think it was. And so Polly's murder would have been probably seen by the police at the time as a one-off.
London in 1888 was the biggest city in the world. You had the West End, very rich, very prosperous, the East End, very, very poor.
Whitechapel was a district within the East End of London. It was an area where you had people barely able to survive, people living in poverty, people literally starving to death.
Off the main thoroughfares, you had all these rat-infested alleyways and courts, really, really horrific, people living in awful conditions. Many single women in the East End couldn't afford their own house or flat. So every day they'd have to try and scrape together 4 old pennies for a bed for the night in what we call a common lodging house or doss house. And I say beds, but in many of these places they were actually coffins lined up in rows up against the walls.
A lot of the women would have to resort to casual prostitution. It was a case of what they needed to do to get that income.
There is a term for these women, which was unfortunates, because they'd fallen through the net.
I think Jack the Ripper targeted these women because they were easy targets and vulnerable ladies walking the streets.
If it was prostitution that they used to survive, they were the ones who knew the streets. So effectively, it was the victims who chose the murder site. Because of what they did, they knew where to take their clients to, where there was little danger of interruption. So they chose, unwittingly, the perfect place at which to be murdered.
So Polly Nichols is killed August 31st. Literally a week later, on the 8th of September, another murder takes place, and that's Annie Chapman.
Annie was found murdered in the rear yard of Hanbury Street, also in the East End, close to where Polly was killed. She was laying on her back in the yard with her face towards the step. She had terrible mutilations, the same as Polly.
Also, the killer's taken a trophy. He's cut out and gone off with the womb of the victim. which suggested that the reason for the murder had been specifically so the killer could acquire that particular part of her anatomy.
Annie was the oldest of our victims. She was 47 years old.
According to police reports, Annie had no income whatsoever. To survive, she started selling trinkets on the streets. When that didn't work, then she would resort to casual prostitution.
Again, as with Polly Nichols, on the night before her murder, she hasn't got the money to pay for her bed.
So witnesses said she was walking around looking for a client, and then at some point that night, a witness had seen Annie talking to a man outside the front door to 29 Hanbury Street, but she didn't see his face. She later said he had the appearance of a foreigner from the way he was dressed. It's believed that this was Jack the Ripper.
And according to police records, what we know what happens next, the two go through the entrance, which was never locked, number 29. It led into a passageway, and the dark passageway led into the backyard. That's where Jack kills Annie.
Staying at number 27 Hanbury Street at the time of Annie's murder, which was the house next door, was a man named Albert Kadosh.
He was going into the toilet, which was at the bottom of the garden, and he overhears a cry of no and a thud against the fence, and many believe that was actually Annie's body hitting the fence.
In all probability, if he had looked over the fence, he would have witnessed the murder of Annie Chapman being committed.
Annie's throat had been cut from left to right back to the spinal column. She'd been ripped up to the breastbone. Her intestines had been taken out and placed over her shoulder. At her feet were several objects from her calico pocket which had been cut open. There was a comb, piece of paper, all sorts of things just out of her pocket that she'd been wearing. He'd laid them out almost systematically at her feet. Very bizarre.
And because she's been mutilated in the same way as Polly, police believe that both murders were by the same hand. At the scene of the crime, they're looking for any clues that the murderers left behind. And that's when the police find a freshly washed leather apron in the corner of the yard. And they think, oh, we've got him, we've got the murderer.
And the reason for that bit of excitement was, after the murder of Polly Nichols, the police were already investigating a suspect known as Leather Apron.
At the time, the prostitutes in Whitechapel had started talking about this sinister character called Leather Apron, and they're convinced this is the man responsible.
Leather Apron was a man named John Pizer, who lived in Whitechapel. He was a cobbler. For his work, he naturally wore a leather apron. So when they found the leather apron, they dragged him off down to the police station, where they gave him a good interrogation.
Now, it turns out the leather apron they found has got nothing to do with the murder.
It was just a local resident had cleaned his leather apron and laid it over the fence to dry off.
Pizer had cast iron alibis for the nights of the murders, so he was then released as a suspect. And it turns out he's really the first of an awful lot of suspects in the case.
At this point, the police recognised that there was something highly amiss in Whitechapel. 2 dreadful murders, terrible mutilations, most likely killed by the same hand.
What was frightening was that there was somebody out there who wanted to kill you, and you'd never met them, you'd never done them any harm. They weren't killing you for a reason.
Horror starts to set in about these murders. People thought, what sort of monster would do this? There is a sense the killer knew his way around Whitechapel. Whitechapel at the time was made up of lots of narrow alleyways, twisty little passageways that went between buildings. All he needs to know is where the nearest bolt hole is that he can get down quickly and escape from the scene of the crime. And then when he's made Whitechapel Road, or the busy main road that goes through the heart of the area, or Commercial Street, the busy thoroughfares, then he can just make his way and lose himself in the crowds.
The police very early on took a decision not to speak to the press about the activities they were undertaking or their lines of investigation. And naturally, the press were looking for sensational stories and became frustrated that there weren't any leads to act on, except the suspect, Leather Apron.
Then, on the 27th of September 1888, the Central News Agency received a very interesting letter. Written in red ink, it starts, "Dear Boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me. They won't catch me just yet."
And then it goes on to boast in mocking terms about what he's done. The police can't catch him.
And at the end, it's signed, "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper."
Dear Boss letter is probably the most important document that we have because it's the one that gives us the name Jack the Ripper.
It summarised what the chap was doing to the ladies. They were being ripped open. That type of horror in a nickname, Jack the Ripper. It's a newsman's dream.
The murderer's now got a name, so he's no longer a nebulous figure. He has that name, Jack the Ripper. The problem is that the majority of police officers believe this letter was the work of an enterprising London journalist known to senior Scotland Yard detectives. So in other words, a journalist wrote the letter. It was a journalistic hoax.
Many people at the time, including relevant police authorities, did believe they actually knew the identity of the person who did do it, and that was a person from the Central News Agency itself, trying to generate, excitement for the press. So I personally don't think the Dear Boss letter was written by Jack the Ripper.
When they got the Ripper letter, there doesn't appear to be one solid suspect or lines of inquiry that the police were following at that time.
The police were desperate for a breakthrough, so they decided to make the letter public. And it was reproduced and put up on posters, but also it was put in the newspapers as well. Releasing it proved to be a mistake because that name was so chillingly accurate, Jack the Ripper. It caught on, and hoaxers across the land began reaching for their pens. And throughout October, the police were inundated with a barrage of letters, many signed Jack the Ripper. And it became almost a national pastime, writing letters signed Jack the Ripper. Every letter had to be read, assessed, and if ever possible, followed up and the author traced. So consequently, the already overstretched detectives are stretched almost to breaking point. Then on the 30th of September, within days of the police receiving the Dear Boss letter, the murderer struck again and carries out 2 murders in less than an hour.
That night is what we now call the double event night.
On this spot, on 1 o'clock in the morning, Louis Deemschutz pulled his horse and cart into the yard, immediately behind where I am now, and he saw the body of a woman. It was Elizabeth Stride, the 3rd victim of Jack the Ripper.
Elizabeth was Swedish. She worked as a nanny for a while to some children and as a cleaner, and then sadly she got into prostitution.
She'd come to England when she was in her early 20s, and she found herself first around the Brick Lane area in the common lodging houses around there. And by the end of September, she'd earned herself a few shillings by cleaning the lodging house she was staying in. She decided to go out for the night and spend what money she'd made. When the body was found, she had a scarf around her neck, which had been twisted to one side and the knot pulled very, very tightly. And there was a large jagged cut, which almost ran to the level of that scarf, as though it'd been used almost as a guide by the killer. There was a river of blood running from the throat down into the gutter in the opposite corner.
Unlike our other victims, she's only had her throat cut. No mutilations. Some people do believe that the reason why Jack only cut Elizabeth's throat was because he was disturbed by that pony and cart coming into the yard.
And because he's been denied the satisfaction of the mutilation, the killer goes looking for another victim. 45 minutes later, in the City of London, the body of Catherine Eddowes is found in Mitre Square.
Where I'm standing here was roughly where Catherine Eddowes' body was found on the night of the double event. Catherine was born in Wolverhampton. Eventually, her two parents die, and she was placed into orphanages, and she moves eventually to London, where she was known as a sex worker at the time, but maybe on a casual basis. She was found around 1:45 in the morning by the policeman, PC Watkins, who was coming round the back, round Mitre Street. He comes into the square, he's on his patrol. He shines the lantern, he gets such a shock when he sees the body here. She wasn't there 15 minutes earlier.
She was the most horribly mutilated of any victim up till that point.
This is another step up. The throat's been cut, she's been cut open. V's have been cut into her cheeks, V's into her eyelids, part of the earlobe's been taken off, tip of the nose. Also, the killer's cut out and gone off with the uterus and the left kidney.
You only had one resident on the square, that was the policeman, Richard Pierce, with his family just sleeping there. Policeman hears nothing, and, amazingly, the night watchman hears and sees nothing. It's like a ghost kills her here.
When Catherine was taken to the City of London mortuary and undressed, they noticed that the apron she'd been wearing was covered with blood, understandably, but a portion of it was missing, as though it had been cut off.
After Catherine Eddowes' body was found, a policeman was walking down Goulston Street, and he's shining his lantern into the doorways, making sure there's nobody hiding, trying to find any weapons, and sees blood in the entrance to the model dwellings on Goulston Street. And in the blood, he sees a piece of material. And it's actually a section of Catherine Eddowes' apron cut off from her body in Mitre Square. Some people believe the reason why the actual apron was dropped there was because the murderer had wiped his hands and knife. But why that specific doorway, nobody knows.
The thing about the blood on the apron piece, it could have been Catherine's, obviously from the horrific wounds. It could have been the killer's inadvertently cut himself while carrying out the mutilations. Unfortunately, there was no blood types at that time, so it was totally useless.
One of the things that many of the Jack the Ripper letters had been threatening was they would send a body part to the police.
2 weeks after the double event, when Elizabeth and Catherine are killed, a local man called George Lusk receives a letter.
He sat down to his dinner table on the 16th of October, and a small package was delivered in the evening mail. And he opened it, and inside was the letter from hell.
And with the letter was half a human kidney.
Now, George Lusk was the head of the Whitechapel Mile End Vigilance Committee. Basically, they would go out at night and they'd patrol the streets, and they'd keep suspicious characters under surveillance.
So the letter that arrived at Mr. Lusk's house said, "Mr. Lusk, sir, I send you half the kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you. T'other piece I fried and ate. It was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out if you only wait a while longer. Signed, catch me when you can, Mr. Lusk." He's obviously saying he's a cannibal, and that he's actually eaten a section of the victim's kidney. Horrible. With the Lusk letter, there was a debate within the police as to whether that was actually Catherine's kidney. Certainly the medical opinions at the time differed. It was the correct kidney, though. It was the left kidney, and Catherine did have her left kidney taken away. If that was Catherine's kidney, then that means that letter is genuine, and there's a 50-50 chance. So I personally have always believed in that letter and believed that the Lusk letter was genuine, but others disagree.
There are those who say that it's the only genuine letter that came from the murderer. Personally, I don't believe it was. I think it was probably the joke of a medical student. It was quite common for medical students to get hold of body parts. The point is that everybody got hooked on this Jack the Ripper scare. It's become almost an obsession, and people just, I need to get involved, I want to get involved.
In the October of 1888, the police had organised a house-to-house search in the whole of Whitechapel. There were several hundred houses searched, several thousand people were investigated, but they really didn't have much of a lead to go on at all, really. It's important to remember in 1888, the police were really limited with the amount of investigatory tools that they had.
They didn't have simple things like fingerprints, and they certainly didn't have CCTV, which would have enabled them to keep an eye on different areas.
Basically, the police investigation depended on a search of the area. Is there perhaps a footprint there that they can use? But none of the traditional methods of detecting a crime are working. We do have witnesses who say, oh, I saw this, I saw that, but we don't know whether they did see the killer or not. A lot of those who saw him talked about him being around about 5'6", 5'7", but then again, that was probably an average height for a man at the time.
Different ages from 20s to 40s, different clothing.
The problem with eyewitness identification at that time is the lighting was extremely poor.
It's like 2 or 3 in the morning and it's dark, we've got limited lighting. How well do we notice things? Often witnesses can be quite wrong accidentally in their descriptions.
So, unfortunately, no one knew what Jack the Ripper looked like.
At this point, the police are going through the East End of London, searching for the murderer. You've also got an interesting situation where you've got lots of people out in disguise to try and catch the Ripper. We know of 3 medical students who were being used as decoys to try and lure the murderer out.
Men who dressed up as women, wandering around the East End in the hope of being attacked by Jack the Ripper so they could catch him.
The women started to arm themselves. So we have pictures of them holding knives, guns, scissors, knowing that, you know, they have to go out on the streets. They have nowhere else to go. They have to get their 4 pennies for a bed for the night. But what an awful situation to be in, to think that your next customer could be your last.
The whole of October went by without any murders, largely because the police presence in the area has really been stepped up.
So, nothing happened until the next murder on the 9th of November.
And it is the worst in the series by far. Mary Jane Kelly was in her mid-20s, so she's the youngest of all of our ladies. And like the other victims, she needed to get money, so she worked as a lady of the night. She has a room of her own in Whitechapel. A man called Thomas Bowyer goes round to collect rent from Mary Jane Kelly. He knocks on the door, nothing. So he goes round to a side broken window. He moves the curtain and sees this horrific sight. Absolutely shocking.
Having the opportunity in that locked room, the killer could do whatever he wanted. Mary Kelly's body was completely eviscerated. Her face was completely cut off, breasts removed, laying on the bed, entrails all around the place.
She's killed indoors. She's the only murder to have been actually sort of happening indoors.
The police took a photograph of the body lying on the bed, and it's one of the earliest crime scene photographs we have. You can't even think it's a human being. It was horrendous.
He'd cut off 3 flaps of flesh, put that on the bedside table. He'd cut off and extracted several sections of her abdominal area, placed them around her body. And if that's not enough, he slices the flesh off from her thigh. Her thigh bone is exposed. And then he cuts out her heart. But sadly, Mary Jane Kelly's heart was never found.
The divisional police surgeon to Scotland Yard, Dr. Thomas Bond, he performed a post-mortem on Mary Kelly as she lay in her room.
They said that it looked as though Mary potentially had been asleep when she was attacked.
Sir Robert Anderson, who was the Assistant Commissioner of Scotland Yard at the time, sought the opinion of Dr. Thomas Bond on the 5 murders. Anderson sent him the inquest reports on the deaths of Mary Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes.
Dr. Bond was known to have been consulted on some of the most notorious cases of the 1870s and 1880s across the country, not just London. After years of working for Scotland Yard, he became interested in the psyche of a killer. He was trying to get an understanding of how a murder was committed rather than just the physical medical side of things. Dr. Thomas Bond produced what is probably the first attempt at profiling a serial killer. And on the 10th of November, he submitted a report to Scotland Yard, which really shaped a lot of the way that we think about the Ripper today.
Bond talks about the similarities between the murders. He says that it would have been a surprise attack, that they wouldn't have been expecting it. The evidence does suggest that he was able, for some reason, to overpower his victims very quickly and render them unconscious.
The idea that the victims were killed while they were laying down is a conclusion drawn up by Dr. Bond in his report. And it certainly gives a lot of credence because there were thumb marks and finger marks found on the necks of the victims, which indicate they were strangled, certainly into insensibility, lowered to the ground, and then had their throat cut. And then the mutilations were carried out after death. Certainly in the 1880s, the idea of a serial killer as we know it today simply didn't exist.
It wasn't until the 1970s that the term serial killer became invented, as it were. But in 1888, the general public simply didn't believe that there were people out there who were killing without what they perceived of as a motive. So the press and the public came up with suspects like the deranged doctor, a midwife, a butcher, because they had various skills that Jack the Ripper had. A butcher would have anatomical knowledge, but not necessarily surgical skill. A doctor would have both, of course. But the doctors at the time were divided in their opinions about whether or not the killer had surgical skill and anatomical knowledge. He certainly would appear to have known where things were in the human body to be able to extract various things. He would have been operating, in some cases, in near to complete darkness. I think he's got to have had a degree of knowledge and skill to have been able to do that.
We know the murders weren't committed for robbery, they weren't committed for revenge.
Not for any financial gain, not for jealousy, not because they're drunk. It's been done purely for the satisfaction of carrying out those mutilations.
The mutilations became more and more intense as the series progressed because that lower level of mutilations wasn't enough for him to get the thrill that he was seeking. They were committed purely for a sexual thrill. That motive or that sort of mental outlook on a perpetrator hadn't been looked at all before. In his report, Bond also gave his opinion as to what the killer was like in terms of character. He was a quiet, well-respected man, probably dressed respectably.
He talks about his living arrangements as well, that he probably had a room he could, at least a room he could retire to, where he could clean himself up. He talks about even his income, that he's either got a private pension or a private income. He talks about the family, that he's living with his family, and his family might be shielding him.
Many people back then thought that Jack the Ripper was possibly a lunatic and therefore may have been walking around the streets, sort of frothing from the mouth and looking clearly very, evil looking and not very well. Clearly the ladies of the night are clever and they're not going to approach anybody like that.
I think the idea of Jack the Ripper as an unknown assailant walking around deserted streets in the early hours with a top hat, carrying his black bag, is an image which has stayed with us for over 100 years. When you look at the early silent movies where there was a lady being tied to a railway track in danger, the villain who did that always had a top hat, black cloak, usually a nice big moustache, exactly the image that you think of Jack the Ripper today, and he really fits nicely into that real perpetrator of terrible deeds.
The black bag part comes from a man who was seen close to the murder of Elizabeth Stride. And he was carrying a black bag, but in fact he'd been doing business somewhere and he was just on his way home and he had a cast iron alibi and had nothing to do with it. But the black bag stuck. Jack the Ripper with the top hat and carrying the Gladstone bag and wearing a cape, I think would have probably stood out like a sore thumb in the East End of London at that time. The real Jack the Ripper must have been able to just walk the streets without being particularly noticed by anybody.
And the other thing to remember is that there were lots of slaughterhouses in the area at the time, and it was quite common to see people in blood-stained clothing walking around the area in the early hours of the morning. Just after Mary Kelly's murder, something unusual happens.
A bunch of time passed by and the murders stopped.
So why would the killer stop? Had he satisfied his bloodlust through the horrific mutilations of Mary?
If the murders have ended, something's happened to the murderer. Has he died?
He may have left the country, may have gone on holiday. He may have been locked up for another crime.
Some people have conjectured that maybe he was in quite ill health. And then some people thought he may be a sailor, commit the murder and then disappear again on the boat, going out again. Is almost a perfect way of committing a murder.
And then, of course, there is the asylum theory. The murders ended because the killer went into an asylum. Very early on in the investigation, the police had an awful lot of suspects. You've got people being pulled in by the police on almost a conveyor belt.
Every person that was potentially cited as acting in a suspicious manner, who looked like someone that had been seen by a witness, they had to follow up their story. And over the years, there's obviously a lot of people, for very good reasons, who've done their own research and come up with their own suspects. And there are a handful of suspects worth taking seriously.
One suspect in the police files is Montague John Druitt.
Druitt was a barrister in South London, but he was also a teacher as well. Around about November 1888, he was dismissed.
His body was found floating in the Thames on the last day of 1888.
When the Jack the Ripper murders stopped, one of the things that the police thought is he's committed suicide. So they're looking at all the suicides that take place just after Mary Kelly's murder. One suicide that comes forward is that of Montague John Druitt. According to the police reports, his own family thought that he was the murderer. His brother testifies that he's been mentally unstable for a time. He's found a note saying he felt he was going mad. It's better that he should die.
But there's no firm evidence that points to Druitt having visited Whitechapel, let alone being seen with any of the women on the nights of their murders. It purely seems to come down to the fact that he was found drowned in the Thames at the end of that year.
Dr. Francis Tumblety is one of the most intriguing suspects. He's the only one of the suspects who was actually arrested for the murders just before Mary Kelly's murder. He was an American, and he was given bail, and he skipped bail and then went back to America. And when he was in New York, Tumblety then started giving interviews saying, well, I was arrested on suspicion of being the murderer. So Tumblety said, all I did was, I did what everybody did. I was fascinated, so I went into the area to look at the murders. And somehow he got himself arrested on suspicion of having committed the Jack the Ripper murders. But of course, there's no evidence to suggest he was the killer.
The last prime suspect after Tumblety and Druitt was just given the name Kosminski.
The name Kosminski appears to have come from police files. They described him as a Polish Jew who was put into an asylum. We don't know who Kosminski was, but a search was done, and it does appear to have been a fairly comprehensive search of asylum records looking for a Kosminski. And the only one that's been found is a man called Aaron Kosminski.
Aaron Kosminski. He lived in Whitechapel. He was a young Polish Jew, but he didn't go to the asylum until 1891. He was still wandering around Whitechapel 3 years after Mary Kelly was killed. So that doesn't really chime with the idea that the suspect was taken off the street soon after the last murder.
Sir Robert Anderson and Chief Inspector Donald Sutherland Swanson, the two highest ranking officers on the case, both appear to have thought that a man named Kosminski was the murderer. Anderson and Swanson were in the position to know all the evidence against all the suspects, and if they thought the evidence against Kosminski was stronger than the evidence against any other suspect, he has to be high on the list of suspects for being Jack the Ripper. The only problem is that we can't say with any degree of certainty that Aaron Kosminski is definitely the Kosminski they had in mind.
Over the years, there's been more and more suspects and various theories coming out. And in fact, the Johnny Depp film From Hell and the Michael Caine 1988 television series, probably the two most well-known fictional versions of the Ripper story, both featured Sir William Gull as the Ripper.
So Sir William Gull, who has actually been claimed as the murderer in nearly all the films you'll ever see, has been linked since the 1970s with what we call the royal conspiracy theory. So according to the theory, Queen Victoria's grandson, Prince Albert Victor, had an affair with an East End prostitute and they had a baby girl, Alice. Alice had a nanny, Mary Jane Kelly. Mary Jane had 4 friends, Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and together as a group, they set out to blackmail the Crown and the government with this secret knowledge about a baby. Therefore, the royal doctor, Sir William Gull, was sent out to track them down, to kill them, to keep the secret silent forever.
The problem with that theory is that Sir William Gull had a stroke in 1887, so he was physically incapable of trundling around Whitechapel carrying out these murders and mutilations.
Sir William was never a contemporary suspect. His name does not appear in any police files, in any contemporary papers, in any contemporary documentation with this case whatsoever.
And of course, when that theory is completely debunked, it stayed in the consciousness.
Many people just blame anybody who was literally alive at the time. And I think quite a lot of people have been blamed with no real evidence because very few records sadly exist.
The Jack the Ripper murders, as most people would tend to think of them, were just over the autumn of 1888. That's the murder of 5 victims in a number of weeks. But generally there's a police file called the Whitechapel Murders File, which ranges from 1888 all the way through to 1891 and covers much more than the 5 victims. We don't know how many, if any, of the other victims in the Whitechapel murders wider file may have been killed by the Ripper as well.
There's a file which we refer to as the suspects file of people who were questioned about the Ripper and perhaps suspected at a short while. That file's gone and we don't know what's happened to it.
It was well known that in the years following the 1880s, got into 1890s, police officers were allowed to go and examine the papers. And it seems that right from that point, certain sheets or reports, photographs of the victims that we have today were slowly weeded out, taken away, removed by souvenir hunters. Bond's report went missing from the files for several years, and when it was recovered, sent anonymously to Scotland Yard.
The Dear Boss letter went missing, and that fortunately was returned, and some of the photographs of the victims have been discovered in the last couple of decades. It's a bit like putting together a jigsaw. You have all these pieces, and some of those pieces don't actually fit that jigsaw, and so you manage to put together all the ones that seem to form a picture, and you get a picture and then you get chunks in the picture that are missing.
It is quite frustrating as a crime historian not being able to say this is the person that did it. And more to the point, to be able to solve these killings for the victims' families and descendants, because they are still out there.
The more people look into it, the more facts come to light, and the more facts come to light, then the story just evolves, develops, and takes on different aspects and goes off in directions that you would never expect it to go off in.
Of course, we'd love to know who Jack the Ripper was. I mean, the end of the mystery, that would be terrific. What we would like is any new information, anything that people have got.
There might be documents out there that are in people's lofts, they might be in people's cellars.
I believe there's something potentially out there which could take the case much forward and potentially solve it.
Somebody might open a trunk, might open a case, and there's the evidence that names Jack the Ripper. But until that happens, it's still a mystery.
In January 2018, Joel Baum, a 59-year-old delivery driver, was murdered at his home. At first sight, he had no enemies. However, as we'll see with the criminology professor Alan Bauer, he was hiding a dark story and a heavy family secret. Was he caught up in his past? On January 31st, 2018, at 9:23 p.m., I was called on the phone by Pierre Balences to intervene in a homicide by firearms in Tarn. The living room window was open. I went to look out the window. We see an inanimate man lying on his stomach with his right cheek on the floor. There's blood running from his head to his chest. Tarn was an extraordinary case. The victim, Joel Baum, was 59 years old. He worked as a delivery driver in Tarn. I realized he was there. I accompanied him. Joel Baum discovered the body. That night, around 8 p.m., Joel Baum's partner, Aurelie, came back from work. Night fell, and when she got home, she noticed the lights were out. It was unusual because her partner was supposed to be back from work before her. The door was locked. She tried to use her keys, but she realized the keys were in the lock. She was surprised because it was unusual for her partner to lock the door. She rang the doorbell, but no one answered. She knocked on the door, but no one answered. Their little dog, Jimmy, barked. She realized something was wrong. Aurelie went to the window on the street and she saw Joel Baum. It was someone determined and with cold blood. There were no screams, no shouts. We heard a young man who lived right next door who, around 7 p.m., heard 3 or 4 explosions. He thought it was firecrackers. He looked out the window in the street and saw a man dressed in dark colors in a dark car. Someone was waiting for him and he quickly fled. That night, we were informed that something was going on. One of our photographers immediately went to the scene to take some pictures and gather some information. It looks like a counting system. Counting systems are no joke. It's not part of the daily routine of the Tarbes crime scene. Tarbes is a city with a population of a little less than 45,000. It's a working-class city. It's a relatively peaceful city. Local media immediately took an interest in this story because it's atypical and mysterious. Still no gunmen, and even less mobiles, to explain this execution. This is a murder. A murder and not a homicide. But investigators have not yet found a lead. We've looked everywhere, and our friends have been subject to a lot of investigation. We kept a close eye on the case. We asked all the locals. We tried to get closer to the relatives. But no one knew who could be so fond of Joel Baum. He had a very good relationship with his neighbors. He was a nice person. He made the impression of the neighbors. He was rather jovial, even a joker. He had moved to Tarbes a few years ago. He was originally from Ugger. Joel Baum came from a modest family. A minor father, a mother at home, and no less than 8 brothers and sisters. He became a driver, a transporter. He had a CDI. He was a professional driver. He was a stable driver. On the day of the accident, he was in training. He came home for lunch. His companion did not report a feeling of pressure that would have animated his companion. Joel did not seem to be worried at all. He did not seem at all in the position of the one who would be tracked and who would be shot down a few hours later. Joel Baum was passionate about wild boar hunting. That is to say that on his Facebook profile, we could find pictures of him when he fought. Very quickly, investigators will be interested in Joel Baum's hunting friends. Very quickly, it turns out to be an impasse. Investigators will then be interested in Joel Baum's love life. Joel met Ora Lee, who was already the companion of Joel Baum. Joel Baum had a relationship with Ora Lee afterwards. And suddenly, we can say that Joel Baum's son did not respect his father. And it happened quite naturally. Ora Lee is 30 years younger than Joel. It's a surprising age group. And of course, a lot has been said about their different ages. We wonder, of course, to know if there is a dispute in the couple, etc. But in this case, nothing of the sort. Quite the opposite. It was a very good couple. The couple lives modestly. So we quickly move away from the track of a scrawny mobile, in the sense that Joel Baum was not someone known to be easy. His sister, Anik, with whom he is very close, tells the investigators that a few months earlier, his ex-husband was threatening, both to her, but also to Joel Baum. Because Joel Baum intervened in an altercation that they both had, a couple conflict, where Anik Baum's ex-husband physically raped her. The ex-husband had threatened Anik Baum and his whole family to put a bullet in their head. Obviously, as it looks a lot like the crime scene, the investigators will be interested in this person. They will question him. He admitted that the separation was going wrong and that he could have held this kind of speech, this kind of threat. In any case, he was the author of the murder of Joel Baum. The investigation will be closed very quickly since ultimately no clue allowed to consider that he was somehow linked to the death of Joel. Joel Baum had no known enemies in Tarbes. Nevertheless, we quickly understood that something was happening in connection with his past. I have always wished for the death of Joel Baum. I was happy to know that he was dead. I put messages on Facebook. I asked for sons of whores, bastards. I even thanked the person who had killed him. From February 4th, less than a week after the discovery of Joel Baum's body, we realized that Vanessa Manini, ex-girlfriend of Joel Baum, on her Facebook wrote a message. Obviously, she was delighted with what happened to Joel Baum. It can only alert us investigators. It is an extremely important moment in the investigation because it turns out that there is a heavy judicial past between Joel Baum and this Manini family. It happens in the Drôme, 20 years before. He lives at that time with a woman who has 3 children, Vanessa and Jerome Manini. Investigators discover that Joel was sentenced by the Court of Appeal of Grenoble to 6 years in prison in 1999 for sexually assaulting his 2 beautiful daughters. One day, I was going to take a shower. I was little, I was 6 years old. He asked me to spread my legs and he started to caress me. Since that day, he has not stopped. He started to ask me to spread my legs. He raped me. It lasted from the age of 6 to 14. When I was little, I thought it was normal. As time went on, he gave me money, he bought me CDs. But he told me, "You don't tell anyone or your mother will be sad, we will separate. So you don't talk about it." I didn't talk about it. Sometime later, Vanessa confided in a friend. She talked about it. The social worker came to see me at the school and she told me, "You have to go see your mother." That's how he was arrested on the same day. And he will deny the facts. Nevertheless, in view of the constant statements of the children, circumstantial statements, repeated, which seem coherent, Joel Baum will be judged and sentenced. He was judged for sexual assault. He should have been judged for rape. There was evidence that he raped me. The file talked about penetration, digital penetration. But the judicial institution at the time considered that it was preferable to be judged more quickly and in a less brutal way for the victims and avoid the court rather than the correctional tribunal. He was not punished as he should be punished. It generated anger. I saw a psychologist and I was a little revolted. Because whatever I did, it didn't last long. Joel Baum was incarcerated from 2000 to 2005. And when he was released from prison, he was forbidden to reside in the La Drone department. It's there that he intervenes with his sister, who invites him to come and live with her in Tarbes. He wants to turn the page of this story. He builds a new life in Tarbes. I saw him on Facebook to see how his life was compared to mine. I was curious to see where he was in it, because I only wanted his misfortune anyway. He seemed happy with his wife, who always went hunting, as he did before when he was with my mother. It displeased me because I saw him well. It was his happiness that hurt me. Facebook continues to make Joel Baum live socially with Vanessa Manini. And it is by seeing the photos, by seeing the posts that could have been made by Joel Baum that his suffering will be all the more lancet. He is doing well, her life is a field of ruins. And obviously, this difficulty will make the image of Joel Baum even more obsessive for Vanessa Manini. While Vanessa claims to have been raped by Joel Baum, he is convicted of sexual assault. Alan, what is the difference between these two qualifications? And it must be said, these incriminations have evolved a lot over time, sometimes in an extremely contradictory way. Rape, sexual assault, and sexual assault are three different offenses. They repress distinct behaviors and are pursued and associated with specific offenses. First, the most important Article 222.23 specifies that it is a sexual assault whose specificity lies in the existence of a penetration. Sexual assault is committed with violence, constraint, threat, or surprise. As for sexual assault, it necessarily involves a physical contact with the victim, without violence, and generally only concerns minors. Rape is therefore a crime and is treated as a crime, while other sexual assaults are only offenses. All are constituted when they have been imposed on the victim by surprise, by force, or by force, whatever the nature of the existing relations between the assailant and the victim, including if they are united by the marriage. How many convictions are there per year in France? In 2023, the last known figure, there were 1,304 convictions for rape, including 285 concerning minors, and 9,257 convictions for sexual offenses, including 1,332 concerning minors. The death of Joel Baum, does it have a link with his past? Investigators now prefer this track. In 2010, he posted on Facebook a message denouncing acts of pedophilia. He said that pedophiles were big shit. In a way, he said that. His ex-partner will comment on this publication, telling him that he is badly placed to teach since he himself committed this kind of act, and he invites netizens to beware of Joel Baum. It makes you react, because when you know the person you know, you can't say things like that. Subsequently, Joel Baum had filed a complaint in April 2010 because he was receiving injurious phone calls from his ex-wife, his daughters, and their brother Jerome, threatening to kill him. All these things make us on a serious track. Investigators will take a soft approach. They will approach the two sisters and brother Manini, and they will question them about Joel Baum, his past, but in a free hearing mode, like an investigation. They pretend they don't really care. Everyone thinks he got what he deserved. They clearly say so. so we really feel hatred towards Joel Baum. But they say they have nothing to do with Joel Baum's death. Manini will be questioned for several weeks. It won't help because they don't talk about it. At this point, investigators have no material to link the Manini family directly to the murder of Joel Baum, except for his messages on social media and their spontaneous statements where we understand that there is a real problem. Investigators will look at Joel Baum's phone, but it's quite logical to know if he was able to receive calls from suspects.
There is a number that contacted Joel Baum's line the day before the events. It's a conversation that lasted less than 3 minutes, and it's a number he never called and will never call again. This number intrigues investigators. This call comes from a prepaid card. The title of this line is not identified by the operator. We don't know who this number belongs to. This call comes from the drone. For investigators, this call is suspicious because the drone is where the entire Manini family lives. Investigators will also look to identify this dark-colored vehicle described by the witness as having left the crime scene. We work on video surveillance and establishments that can be found on the route of this car. It's a washing station and we can see a small car driving very fast. We can't read the registration. We can't see the number of occupants in the vehicle. Video surveillance is not limited to the crime scene environment. They will question the highway companies. We do image surveillance on tolls on the route of Montélimar-Tarbes. They found that a Renault Clio brand car had made the trip from La Drôme to Tarbes on January 31st in the morning, very early in the morning, and had left in the evening in the opposite direction from Tarbes to La Drôme. This is a black Renault Clio registered DV134QI. A driver and a passenger were found. It is impossible to put a face on the two potential suspects of the murder of Joel Baum. This vehicle was quickly tracked at 11.24 in a station in Tarbes, roughly 500 meters from Mr. Baum's home. We will discover in the images of video surveillance 2 individuals. The first one is 30 years old, the second one is 20 years old. The driver is the one who will settle a check. He is dressed all in black. The passenger, dressed in a top and a bottom of light color, takes the gun, the pump, and performs a fuel supplement. These are not very clear images that make it difficult to describe a face because their face is quite concealed by the port of a cap for one or the other. The investigators notice that this man who wears this light sweater, we see that he has a balding arm. We see that he is a handicap to the arm. This is a decisive element because when the investigators became interested in the Manini family, they learned that Jerome Manini lost the use of his right arm. We have strong suspicions about Jerome Manini. Obviously, it is him. He is present in Tarbes at that time. On the other hand, we do not know who is the driver who will pay the check. At that time, he is not identified. This is the turning point of the investigation. This is where they have the uncertainty that Jerome Manini is involved in this case. Once we have the registration of this Clio, we do the research. This Clio was found deeply immersed in the Rhône, in Bourg-les-Valences. This is a vehicle that was stolen in the Drôme. This car was falsely registered. In the Clio vehicle, they found a tape that was used to repair a broken custom. On this tape, the DNA of Mr. Manini and his friend will be found. Jerome Manini and his friend were already part of the FNEG database, the National File for Genetic Imprints. Jerome Manini was the subject of proceedings for road infractions. Small crimes. Mr. Manini's friend was known for using narcotics. He had never been incarcerated. We have a photo of this person and we can see that this person corresponds to the driver of the Clio who was seen at the station on the 31st of January. The investigators are certain that at the time of the murder, there were 2 individuals, Mr. Manini and his friend, on board a vehicle. However, they do not know who held the gun when the shots were fired. Mr. Manini has a disability. It makes them think that if his friend came, it was perhaps to hold the gun and shoot. We have material elements. We have 2 suspects. We need to intervene. We need to know who did what. We need an explanation from these 2 individuals and the mobile phone. To know the reason. To have confessions is ideal. On June 5th, 2018, at 6 a.m., we called on Montelimar Jerome Manini. When we were going to get in the vehicle, I heard the little one ask his dad, "When are you coming back?" Of course, when you are a father, a police officer and a father, it does not leave you sensitive. I learned of my brother's arrest, but I panicked. I had no idea. I did not expect that. And Jerome's childhood friend, who took him to Tarbes, he was arrested in Valence. When Jerome Manini was first placed in custody, he said he was innocent. Jerome Manini quickly understood that we did not want to arrest him without evidence, and that we still had, as we say in our Javon, a few bullets. Jerome Manini will recognize after 1H05 in custody that he is the author of the facts. He wanted to tell the truth to the investigators. He explains to the investigators that he has been thinking for many years to kill Joel Baum, that it is a project that remained until then in the order of fantasy. Jerome Manini has already put in place concrete things, already 2 years before. Jerome Manini explains how he got the gun. Jerome Manini had gone to Marseille, he had entered a bar, he had asked for advice, and a person had come to tell him who to see and what the price was for such a gun. He bought this Milo gun. And as crazy as it may seem, he got a gun in 5 minutes. He bought it 2 years before killing Joel Baum. Nevertheless, he was not yet mature to take action. It will mature for 2 years, he will rethink, he knows he has this gun, but for now it is still hidden in a corner of the garage. In January, 15 days before the facts, the investigator will receive a stolen car. This Renault Clio, which cost about 1,000 euros, could be obtained. A Clio, which may not have been chosen by chance. A dark Clio. Unfortunately, the stolen vehicle he had bought is a manual gearbox. It should be remembered that Jerome Manini is disabled with the right arm. It is therefore impossible for him to drive him to Tarbes. That's why he's going to call this friend to assist him. The day before the crime, Jerome Manini is going to call Joel Baum with this prepaid phone number to get his address. And to get it, he's going to pretend to be an EDF agent. Jerome Manini and his companion will leave Montelimar very early on January 31st. They will cross France, cover nearly 600 kilometers to join the city of Bigourdain. We know that afterwards, they will hide in front of his house. Jerome Manini is dressed in all black, a cap, gloves, to avoid leaving his eyebrows or his DNA prints on the weapon than on Joel Baum's bell. Jerome Manini declares, "I see Joel Baum, come home, it's about 5 p.m. He then explains to us, having considered, I'm not going, how is it going to happen? What am I going to do? I don't ask any more questions. He explains that he took the steps near Joel Baum's house. He was taken hostage. He wants to talk to this man, he wants explanations, he wants them to tell him why he did that, what he did to his sisters, he wants his version. And finally, rings the bell. He wanted to talk to him. Except that, it doesn't happen like that. Joel Baum opens the living room window. Jerome Manini is a bit out of control. He's surprised, so he moves to the end of the living room. As Jerome Manini explains, we face each other, we recognize each other, and I ask him, "Do you remember me?" And Jerome Manini explains, "I'm going to shoot." I shoot without looking. And he says, yes, at that moment, it's a wave of hatred that submerges me, and unfortunately, I'm going to empty my magazine. It was an execution. A child who executed Joel Baum, he had left the vehicle. He goes back to the Clio and he says to his friend, "I shot him." And his friend asks him, "But you shot him." And he says to him, "I shot him." So the two run away, behind the wheel of this car, return to the direction of the highway, and go to the region of the Drome. Jerome Manigny will get rid of himself on the way to the gunman that he claims to have thrown into a river. He will get rid of his gloves and all the clothing effects that allow him to identify him. And they will get rid of the car by immersing him in the Rhone. Jerome Manigny was extremely organized and cold, almost clinical, in the mission to execute Joel Baum. He tried to commit the perfect crime. I learned that my brother had a gun, and I must admit, I was shocked. I didn't believe it. I would never have thought that my brother could do that. Jerome Manigny is clearly not the profile of the cold-blooded killer. He is someone who appears like a good husband, a good family man, very fusional with his intentions. I've always said he's like my twin brother, my brother. We have the same things. We laugh a lot together. I see him very, very generous. He has a good heart and he likes to do me a favor. My brother had a protective side. Whether it was my mother or my sisters, he was always there and he helped everyone. I love him very much. He's my brother. Jerome Manigny had not told anyone about his criminal project. Jerome's companion, once we told her that Jerome had passed away, she cried. If I had known anything, I would have stopped my brother. I always wanted him to die, but it was an accident. I didn't need my brother. To explain his gesture, Jerome Manigny says that he has a hatred against Joel Baum because Joel Baum hurt his sisters when they were young. We can say it's a vengeance. You shoot someone 6 times and you don't shoot back. If you shoot someone, you really want that it doesn't come out. It's a feeling that he ate all his life, but lately, he only thought about that. It's hard to explain why he did it 20 years later. At first, he explains that he is relieved to have killed Joel Baum. However, sometime later, he says that he felt guilty. He was relieved for a short time. Then, he feels the need to apologize to his friend. To say, he just carried me because I couldn't do anything else and he didn't know anything. Mr. Manigny told him that there was a 5,000 euros that he had with an individual who refused to pay him. So, he wanted to go there to put a little pressure on him by saying, "Now, you have to pay me." Mr. Manigny's friend, in his custody, says, "If I had known, I would have accompanied Mr. Manigny on site." And he says, "I didn't see the gun during the journey or when Mr. Manigny left the vehicle to go shoot Mr. Baum." A doubt will very clearly surface that there is a conservative version that Mr. Baum is the one and his friend to try and by any means to apologize to this friend. And so, the two, Manigny and his friend, are presented to the instruction judge and put on trial both for murder because we're not sure who shot. Ferrum Manigny is placed in temporary detention at the police station. Mr. Manigny's friend, he doesn't have a criminal record. He has a professional situation. He lives with his partner, and it is in these conditions that the judge will place him under judicial control. While Jerome Manigny is in prison awaiting his trial, the instruction continues with a central question. Why did this man decide to make justice to himself 20 years later? The personality investigation, she's going to tell us a lot about her jealous background, about her drama. Jerome Manigny was born in Montélimar from a parental couple who separated at the age of 5. The father was a worker, the mother was a housewife. I know we had a very difficult childhood. My father was an alcoholic. He was violent towards other people, so we saw things we shouldn't have seen until the day my father managed to kill his twin brother. His father had a fight at a Christmas party with Jerome Manigny's uncle. His father was sentenced to 5 years in prison. These are disturbing things. My brother was afraid of everything that happened, so it didn't help. He's close to his mother, but he's not a very maternal person. She meets Joel Baum. Jerome Manini is 5 years old. He quickly falls in love with this man. Joel Baum takes her hunting, he takes her fishing. They talk about this happy time. Jerome Manini is 12 years old. That's when Joel Baum leaves the family home. He understands that something happened to Joel Baum and his sisters, but no one wants to tell him what exactly happened. It was a family secret. Jerome Manini only learned about what happened to his sisters by listening to the news. He felt betrayed by the man he considered a real father, or at least a stepfather. He says he feels guilty for loving this man who hurt his sisters. The thing he can't digest is that he hurt his sisters in his presence. He was sleeping in the room next door. I know he's also angry about it because he didn't see it. He couldn't have seen it. A pedophile is very smart and he wouldn't have seen it at all. He felt very guilty for not being able to defend his sisters. I think it explains the painful suffering that leads him to commit the act. We are in the middle of a passion crime. In the first sense of the term, passion comes from the word passion, which means suffering. Psychologists and psychiatrists who met Jerome Manini talk about the cocotte minute phenomenon. For them, it's childhood traumas that come back, that have been repressed, fed, at different times in their lives. I think this need for vengeance had to grow in him, and this accident that he had also, which probably disrupted his existence. He started his career at the end of his apprenticeship in 2004, and he had a serious accident at work. A tree fell on his back. He will undergo several surgical interventions, but he will never recover from the use of his right arm. Nevertheless, he is gradually rebuilding himself. He will even find a job, but once again, fate is on his side. This company will go bankrupt, and Jerome Manini will go through a long period of unemployment. And it is at this time that he will begin to seriously relive the pain of the past. He was perhaps more free-spirited. He didn't have a valuable image of himself. Did he want to give himself an emblematic role, a role of masked justice? Jerome Manini was therefore deeply affected by what happened to his sisters and did not receive psychological support at the time of the events. To whom was this psychological support generally offered? It can be offered to anyone who has directly or indirectly suffered the effects of a crime, whether it is the victim in person or one of his loved ones, who indicates that he or she is, in a secondary way, by a secondary effect, affected or impacted by the crime, or by the aggression that took place. Nearly 400,000 victims are reconsidered and taken into account each year. The Ministry of Justice is in charge of all the assistance and support systems for the victims and finances it with the help of many associations present in the territory. Is this assistance taken care of by the state? This assistance is taken care of by the state, by the appeals courts, which have a specific budget affected by this effect, but the real charge is made by about 200 local associations which generally assume all the victims, or specifically only minor victims, for example, or victims of terrorism, the actions of psychological support, and sometimes more important if necessary. 3 years after the events, Jerome Manini appears before the Court of Assistance of the Hautes-Pyrénées for the murder of Joel Baum.